the integrity of the United Kingdom as a single entity may now be under threat, though one might safely say the same about the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon this morning. We'll see how the day passes. But look, what we see in the data is this perceived mishandling of the pandemic in Westminster, driving widespread concern about the future of the union itself. COVID has exposed government strengths and weaknesses more than any other event we've experienced in our lifetime. Nicky, how serious do you think the government is treating the threat to the union, and how easy do you think it will be to bake the kind of union story, if you like, into all government departments?
So I think the government is obviously treating it very seriously. I mean, we are the Conservative and Unionist Party, and that bit is taken very seriously. I think, as you know, there's been obviously the usual sort of focus on personalities, number 10, who's dealing with the union, the setting up of this union committee. But I think what that will do, exactly as you say, Ed, is the intention is to instill a discipline within Whitehall, that things should be seen through a union prism. Those departments that operate in areas of policy that aren't devolved should make full use. And I think the UK, the Internal Market Bill that we were debating at the end of 2020, should be seen as a bit of a marker, really, which is about the government and Whitehall being more assertive in terms of the areas of policy. And they will remind people, I think particularly in Scotland, but those areas, things like the vaccination rollout, where the UK Army is offering support, and that's happening, as well as obviously the SNP record. Throughout the pandemic, what the public has seen, of course, is the four nations responding to the pandemic, making different decisions about lockdown dates and when to come out. And I think probably for people who've never really thought about the union, then actually that has really crystallised in their minds. Actually, there is a difference between the four nations.
I think the Edelman Trust Barometer is absolutely right. The pandemic has played a major role in aggravating the differences within the United Kingdom. And it's one of the unintended and unforeseen consequences of devolution. Here you have a pandemic hitting the country, probably the most serious threat to the country since the end of the Second World War. And it never crossed anybody's minds, probably not even Nicola Sturgeon's at one stage, that we were going to deal with this existential national threat as four separate nations. That in effect, for the pandemic, Boris Johnson would be the Prime Minister for England, and that Nicola Sturgeon would be entirely in charge of just about everything north of the border. And of course, she has played that for all it's worth. She has been perceived to be more successful at dealing with it, partly because she's more articulate than the Prime Minister in dealing with it, also because she does have a supine local media there that very rarely ask the hard questions. But I think that has exacerbated it. And I think looking back, people will be quite surprised that as the country faced this threat, we did it in four different ways.
I don't think it's surprising that we feel the union is more under threat and more under discussion than it's ever been, when we have this decreasing feeling of being together, and none of us can remember what the rules are here, let alone what they are in Scotland, or if we're allowed to go across the border to Wales or not. You know, it's not surprising that that's a dreadful shock. And to Andrew's point, clearly the leaders in the nations have had a much bigger chance to speak and take that platform. Far be it from me to comment on how they've done it. I think the reality is that we have to make sure that we're reporting properly. You know, we have in Scotland Kieran Jenkins, who reports there. We have in Wales Andy Davis. We had Krishnan up in Edinburgh at the moment reporting on the Sturgeon case. You know, we're doing that coverage. We've got Darshna reporting in from places like Leicester, talking about what's really happening there on the ground. But we have a lot more of that to do. And the truth is, the broadcasters all called wrong the Brexit referendum. They were at the time too focused on what their mates in London thought. And there has been a need for change there for a long, long time. Now, as you know, we've made huge strides to try and change our organisation. We've already got a couple hundred people in Leeds. We've located the biggest department we've got in terms of spend out of Glasgow now. We've got an office up and running in Bristol. We're moving to spending 50% of our money outside of London. But it's only by doing that things will change. Like, you've got to have programmes made by people who don't live in the metropolis or the biggest metropolis. You've got to have editorial conversations that are always including significant figures who don't live in London. And we've got that now. And people say, well, it's all very well, that programme, but no one outside of London will watch it. Thanks very much. And it's that starts to change opinion. But it takes a long time to do that. And we have got to change our organisations away from a belief that things happen better in London or bigger things that happen in London. And that only happens by having a lot of your people and senior people based elsewhere and often coming from elsewhere.